So I only have 3 questions. What is absolute knowing? What is nature? And what is history? So we should be able to answer those each in a minute, and then we're done. So got another cake pop.
Cake pops and Hegel. Best combo ever. Well, almost. I have no idea. I can tell you what Kalkovich says. I'm just more curious to compare Kalkovich to Žižekian concepts, since this is new stuff for me.
A really general and not very helpful sense I got on the absolute knowing. There's this whole book has been about this trying to treat something trying to, I guess, the spirit trying to achieve unity with itself. So it's like it generates this opposition, and then it's just this dialectical process of subsuming this opposition, and another opposition arises and all that. And from the very first section or the very first chapter or paragraph, I guess, of this section, it just sounds like finally what absolute knowing is when when all of these oppositions are overcome, and absolute knowing is just when subject and object completely I don't know what, become unified somehow. And that seems like it's the ultimate culmination is just when these oppositions, I don't know what, there's a final sublation or something. But that is not very helpful, but that's just sort of the general idea I got. The overcoming, this is the first section, first paragraph, the overcoming of the object of consciousness. So,
did you get a sense that Hegel thought that it was possible for us here on Earth, or was he getting more like spiritually, trying to get to the, begging everyone's pardon, but it almost sounded like, I don't know, it seemed Buddhist to me. There was a sense of striving, but also, even though we're involved in it, we have to not be involved in it. Not have our ego involved, and just be open. I shouldn't say just, be open to, I don't know, the process or whatever.
I was wondering that again at the end, on the very last section, what is, because the last section, I got this sense that this is just going to crank up and get started all over again. And so, like it just, and again, I think another thing is it's difficult to tell when he's talking about a temporal process and when he's not talking about a temporal process, because history is a temporal process, but then there's other parts of this that sound like he's trying to describe, like, these moments aren't necessarily moments in time. Yay, Hunter! So we'll have the answer soon. So, but so I don't know this thing at the end when he talks about the whole process and getting cranked up again. Is that a temporal thing, or is that just something that's always and forever happening in right now? So Hunter, here's my 3 questions. Can you hear me, Hunter? Okay. What is absolute spirit? What is nature? What is history? Go.
Easy shit.
Yes. Okay, so hold on. First off, I have a question. Okay. I have a mic plugged in, and I don't know if it actually, I'm zooming in I'm remote. I'm currently on Wi-Fi in Austin in Matt Squire's apartment, trying to zoom in remotely. And I have a mic plugged in, and I want to know if it's the actual mic that's picked and not my computer mic. Let me see. Does this sound like it's hitting the mic?
Yeah, when you hold it closer to you, it's definitely higher quality.
Okay, so when I talk like this, it's absolutely.
Yeah. I see
Okay,
what you're doing there.
yes. Okay. So sorry. I just wanted to check that. Now that I've got that, I just okay. Okay. So first off, what is absolute spirit? What is nature? What is history? I'm gonna give an answer that's more brief than anything I've ever given because I'm actually a little I had a margarita before I did this, and I'm a little bit drunk. I'm gonna be completely honest. I don't usually drink, but I had a margarita at Hop Dotties. Very good. But so I'm a little bit drunk. So let's just
And
see.
just to clarify for terms of service, so we don't get violated or you're not doing any type of physical harm, you're imbibed, but you are not intoxicated, right?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I'm a
Okay,
little
just
bit.
making absolutely sure we make that clear.
Yeah, in terms of liability, it's all on me. So let's just see. First, is there a fucking way to lower this chair? Okay, sorry. I'm in somebody else's office. I'm trying to make do. Okay, so just super briefly, what is absolute spirit and what is nature and what is history? Absolute spirit is the position that spirit finds itself in within revealed religion. Revealed religion is the practice of spirit amalgamating itself in actuality as actions against actuality. Absolute spirit. Absolute spirit was this position that we released, that we reached here. I'm going to read about it. Okay, so spirit for itself is the object which signifies the universal spirit. This would be on page like 393 to 392. This would be from a previous reading, but I can actually find the page if we want to talk about absolute spirit. Give me just a second, and I can find the exact.
He said absolute knowing.
You said what is absolute knowing, and
Yeah.
what is nature, and what is history? Oh well, then fuck absolute spirit, because absolute spirit is just a phase of spirit within revealed religion. What is absolute knowing? Okay, absolute knowing to me here. I can go to the section actually, and let's just read what did I take as notes on absolute spirit. I think, or absolute knowing. Absolute knowing is spirit knowing itself in the shape of spirit. It's the comprehending conceptual knowing. It is comprehending conceptual knowing. It is a space where the content of certainty gives rise to truth as it is in the shape of itself. What that means is, okay, if we read this in sort of a subjective idealist way, which is like a typical way to read Hegel, this would be the place where we are actually in truth. We are totally in inequality with truth, or not inequality, like non-equality. I mean, we are in space equality with truth. Yes, that's what I mean. We are in a place of equality with truth where my self-certainty rises up into the position of actual knowledge and truth because of its certainty being identical to the shape of the spirit that is I guess enunciating that certainty. It's like if I say something like I am saying something right now, or I am a negativity, or basically not even that, saying there is a negativity and an opposition and a contradiction within objects and within the concepts that I'm using right now. That enters into this space of absolute knowing. To be as brief as possible, absolute knowing to me, in one sense, in the traditionalist sense, is like actual knowledge. Well, not actual knowledge, because actual knowledge is this functional thing that operates in reality. And Hegel would say actual knowledge is the kind of knowledge that represents actuality, or that functions in practical reality, like inserting the rod A into slot B works, and I have actual knowledge of that, and red and blue actually make purple in actuality. But absolute knowing goes beyond actuality to reach into the subject that is enunciating the thing that it knows. And the only way to reach absolute knowing for Hegel is for the thing that says that it knows something to be stating a fact, or to be operating on a knowledge of itself, or a certainty of itself, and this is absolute knowing in a different way, is kind of the way in which Descartes thought that he was operating when he said, I think, therefore I am. Descartes felt like he was in a place of absolute knowing by saying, I think, therefore I am. I am analyzing only what is present within me. And the only thing that I can be absolutely certain of to the point of reaching absolute truth is that I think, and therefore I am. at least for Descartes. And Hegel tried to take a sub-Cartesian step by doubting Descartes and saying, I don't know if I think, and I don't really know if I am. All I know is that there is a problem of knowledge. You know what I mean? He's like going to like Sextus Empiricus and being like, I know that there's a problem of knowledge. All I know is that, and what that means is it has big implications, which is reality is such that there is a problem of knowledge. That is absolute knowing. Another sort of negative way to read absolute knowing would be to say, not the, and this is something I try to stress sometimes, but it's not the abolition of ignorance, but the total internalization of ignorance, to say that I am distanced from myself in the same way that I am distanced from objects in reality and the noumena. There's a noumenal aspect to myself, and I am equally parallel in my distance from the world, the noumenal world. That distance I have from the noumenal world, that is parallel or homogeneous to the distance I have from myself. And that space of distance itself is a kind of knowing. And oh my God, now we're in a place of absolute knowing. Oh, you know, and okay. So it's just an internalization of ignorance and distance. That's a basic way that I can word that, and we can talk about that more if it's not clear. For the sake of brevity, again, history and nature. He talks about nature. I actually don't know, because I got kind of far in my notes, but there was like 1 to 2 pages that I didn't actually get to. But it was in the last couple pages where he talks about nature as this. Yes. Okay. So here on page 466, let's go to nature and history. Let's talk about nature and history, because actually nature and history are in 466 and 467 of the Cambridge edition of Phenomenology of Spirit, the very last 2 pages of absolute knowing, the very last 2 pages. On page 466, that would be sections 806, 807, and 808. These would be the sections I'm referencing. In these sections, 806 and 807, in the beginning of 808 specifically, he says thinking. He talks about thinking. He says this is the discussion of nature and history. I'm just going to give a brief summary of nature and history. He says thinking is a thing that breaks things up and exhibits things according to opposition. Thinking is a tool of breaking up and opposing. That's his and that, to me, I gotta say, just by the way, just to kind of step back from my brief analysis, I just want to say I loved this section. I felt like it was very cogent and very coherent in his summary of where we were and how we got from where we were to where we are. I thought that it was beautiful. I thought that this section was extremely well written. I very much appreciated this section. And this is an example of that. He's trying to take very basic principles and then gain or produce or put forward, assert very interesting and in one sense modest and in another sense kind of radical conclusions from those basic principles. His first basic principle is that thinking is a thing, not his first basic principle, but his first basic principle in 806, 807, and 808. His first basic principle in those sections is that thinking is a thing that breaks things up and exhibits things according to opposition. Self-knowing spirit ascends to certainty of the immediate in this sense, right? Thinking is breaking things up, exhibiting things according to opposition, and self-knowing in this breaking of things up and this exhibiting of things according to opposition, the self-knowing spirit is able to ascend, right? From certainty of itself, just for the reason that it grasps its own concept. This is what we're talking about in absolute knowing. You know, it's like me saying I am using language right now. That's for sure. That's a very basic statement, and it's for sure. I am using language right now, and that is in a place of something like absolute knowing, in the sense that I am not only exhibiting a fact that we can consider as having truth and certainty, but it is a truth and certainty that is purely reflectively graspable. You know what I mean? I don't actually know if that, as a principle of absolute knowing, is totally, thoroughly consistent. But I'm a little tipsy, so I'm just saying things as examples. But So he says the self-knowing spirit ascends to the certainty of the immediate because it grasps its own concept. It is an immediate equality with itself, which in its differences is the certainty of the immediate, or is sensuous consciousness. So thinking has become sensuous consciousness. So we're back where we started, right? Oh my God, we're back to sensuous consciousness, where this whole book began, right? But in this sensuous consciousness, it's a different sort of sensuous consciousness than the one that we started at. There's an incomplete relinquishing going on when we go from certainty to sensuous consciousness. Spirit sees its coming to be as a contingent event. It sees itself as a thing in time and being as a thing in space, right? He's saying, like, he's taking the Kantian thing. This is his final, strongest critique of Kant, is this notion of nature. He says, he's basically saying, Kant would say this, that spirit sees its coming to be as a contingent event in time, and it sees its being as an aspect of space. Space and time are fundamental a priori concepts in Kant, right? So he says, okay, this is a flawed space of incomplete relinquishing. He's basically mounting his final ultimate critique of Kant, which is that Kant did not finish the job. Kant relinquished himself and said that there are a priori truths like space and time, but this was an incomplete relinquishing. He says that the complete relinquishing, beyond thinking of yourself as this differentiated series of purely different moments in time, or your being as this thing of extension in space, true relinquishment is a submission to nature, or an understanding of nature, a conceptual comprehension of nature, right? Nature for him, right? And this is in 808. Actually, no, sorry, 807. And I'll read it. I'll read it directly. This final coming to be, nature, is its living, immediate coming to be. Nature, or relinquished spirit. Nature is relinquished spirit. Is in its existence nothing but this eternal relinquishing of its stable existence and the movement which produces the subject. I feel like this is a pretty modest statement. It's similar to Sartre. It's similar. It's not the same, but it's similar to Sartre. You remember when Sartre said human beings have no nature except that they have no nature? The nature of human beings is to have no nature and to be these open sort of tabula rasa style creative enterprises of artistic endeavors, right? Hegel is saying that when we say the word nature, the thing that we refer to when we say the word nature is a relinquished spirit. It is spirit relinquishing itself and saying that there is some sort of locus of control outside of itself. There is this thing that we have to relinquish ourselves for. And Hegel would say that nature, brought to its logical conclusion in this frame, is just this eternal relinquishing to nature. Our nature and the nature of all things is to relinquish themselves to some sort of nature. That's the only thing that we can say is truly natural, is that things happen to have some sort of nature. And that nature is only possible if we relinquish the spirit of that thing. For me to say, it's kind of like me saying, hey, listen, I know that I was extremely rude to you at that party and whatever, but at the same time, I am a man and I have testosterone flowing through my blood, and I'm prone to saying misogynist things because it's my nature. Or I could say, I know that I am a human, and I wish that I could be a pure ephemeral, like ethereal elf being that never has to eat or sleep. But this is my nature. It is to be human, to be flawed, to be feeling, to be needy of certain requirements and tendencies and whatever. I have a nature. Nature does functionally, in terms of our logical reasoning, it does operate. It's not just an illusory thing. It's not just a fake principle that we're tricking ourselves with, but it legitimately is this thing. It is this valid and legitimate thing to which we relinquish our spirit. And thus, as a perpetual thing to which we relinquish spirit, the only thing that we could say is a consistent aspect of nature is this relinquishing of spirit. So he says nature is this eternal relinquishing of spirit and of stable existence. And thus the thing that he can call nature, the nature of spirit at least, is the movement which produces subject. The nature of reality is to move in such a way that it produces subject. Nature is a thing we relinquish ourselves to. We give up power. We let things go. We say that it's just the way things are. It's just, and this is what Hegel is saying, it's not just an excuse that we use to make ourselves feel better, but it does work like that. We can use it like that. We can abuse the notion of nature and say, it's just in my nature, sorry, oopsie, you know, and that's an extreme example, but it's this thing we relinquish our spirits to. It's the final coming to be. It's the ultimate wall that we come up against. When I tell somebody that human beings should be more friendly to each other, or we should have a higher tax on higher echelons of income within the United States, some people might say that is in tension with human nature. Anytime that somebody says human nature, they're putting it up as this indestructible wall that you have to break through, and you can't break through because it's nature. It's just this thing. It's at a certain point, Hegel is saying, not only is nature a valid, constructive concept that we work with, but it is also a rhetorical device founded in actual logic, or the logic of actuality. So it is nothing but eternal relinquishing of stable existence. It is the movement which produces subjects. And then following that, he says, okay, the other aspect of spirit's coming to be is history. This is knowing as self-mediating coming to be, right? It's not necessarily the coming to be that I allow to happen to me. Sort of like if I were a butterfly and I were a caterpillar, not quite a butterfly, I were a caterpillar and I went into a cocoon and I started changing. And then my caterpillar friends came up to me and they said, "You changed, man. Hey, I don't know what happened to you, but the streets changed you, you know? You changed ever since you got into that cocoon." And then I would say, "It's just my nature, brother, you know? It's just my nature. I don't know what to tell you," you know? But then if I say, or if they say, no, it's not just your nature. There seems to be this record of you acting differently for whatever reason. That is chalked up to history. That is the self-mediated becoming or coming to be, right? So history is knowing's self-mediated coming to be. It is, and another way to word that, what is basically the same thing, is spirit relinquished unto time. It is the history. It is spirit relinquished unto time. And that's why you might have dickheads, you might have people who might strongly disagree within this category, who might say, "Oh, but the rest is history," or "Who's to say? Only history will tell," or Aristotle saying there will or won't be a sea battle tomorrow, or whatever. They defer to history. Not only is this valid and actual category of our analysis through the notion of time, which is in the intuitive concept, but it's also a rhetorical gesture. Spirit tries to know itself by recollection, taking an inward turn. It takes an inward turn, tries to recollect, tries to engage with its history, tries to learn about itself. And so spirit is absorbed into the night of itself. I think Hegel would look at pure historians and would say those are spirits that have been absorbed into the night of the self, or the night of itself. Its sublated yet preserved existence is newborn. A new world and a new shape of spirit can take shape in this space, which is why he would say it's not dissing historians to say that they're caught in the night of the world. It's not a bad thing for history to be caught in the night of the world. That's where new stuff happens. That's where sublated existence is newborn. That's where a new world and a new shape of spirit can take place, is in this infinite night. And so he would say, we need historians. And even if you don't fancy yourself a historian, if your intention is to do anything new at all, you need to know what's already been done, you know? So here, it must begin again unto maturity, as if it learned nothing, but it begins at a different place than when it started. The goal of this practice is the revelation of depth, or the sublation of depth. This is its time. He says in 808, he says, this is its time. In fact, on page 467, in the middle of the paragraph, he says, the goal of the movement is the revelation of depth of self. And this is the absolute concept. This revelation is thereby the sublation of its depth or its extension, the negativity of this I existing inwardly in itself, which is its self-relinquishing, or its substance. And it is time. In its own self, the self-relinquishing relinquishes itself, and in that way is in its extension as well as in its depth. in the self. The aim, absolute knowing, or spirit, knowing itself as spirit, has its path in the recollection of spirits as they are in themselves, as they achieve the organization in their realm, or of their realm. I know that sounds like gobbledygook, kinda, but he says, and is its time. This notion of it being spirit's time, the sublation of depth. What is depth? Okay, the things that are below the surface. What's below the surface? History. You know what I mean? And nature. Nature and history are below the surface. And the whole point of spirit's actualizing or movement is to sublate nature and history into a newborn, into a new shape of spirit. So the goal is the revelation of depth insofar as it is the sublation of depth. The point of history is not to repeat history, not to look back and say, what did they do and why should we keep doing it? But to say, what did they do and why did it fail? And to try and create something new. And freestanding existence of spirit is grasped as a contingent element of history, like our freestanding existence of spirit right now in this Zoom call in 2021 as conscious American citizens. We are contingent parts of history. It is grasped conceptually, or I guess within conceptual analysis, in an attempt to grasp it conceptually in the preservation according to the freestanding existence appearing in the form of contingency as history. This conceptually grasped organization is the science of phenomenal knowing. And this science of phenomenal knowing is the recollection and the Golgotha of absolute spirit. It is the place where absolute spirit is recalled, enumerated, expressed, explored, illuminated, etc., but at the same time is mounted on the cross in a place of contradictory destruction. And that cross-shaped Golgothan sacrifice of absolute spirit is what gives rise to the chalice, which foams forth to infinity into nothing. And that nothing is the non, and that non is the impossible, and that impossible is the miracle, or potentia absoluta. And that is why I think Hegel would say that he's both a Lutheran and that he believes in miracles like true love and freedom and so on and so on. That's my basic answer as to what is the absolute knowing and history and nature. And I don't know if that made any sense at all, but yeah.
Hunter, but in your answer to what you're saying, Hegel is saying nature is, nature seemed, you're saying, what I heard you say is Hegel defines nature in terms of human beings. It's human beings saying we're giving up our attempts at control, but it's still referencing human beings. It's not necessarily a redwood tree, the Atlantic Ocean, the Sahara Desert. I'm not being sarcastic, but there would have been a time that there would be a time that there was an earth before human beings. And so when I think of, nature, I'm thinking of the non-human elements of the planet.
Yes, and I agree. I think that there's a reason that he said nature and not human nature, and I think that this connects to this argument that has spanned the book since he brought up substance in the initial shift of substance to subject, or consciousness to self-consciousness, in the peering behind the veil in this investigation of appearance and essence that he did, quite kind of like in the 3/5 mark of the book, I think. The point is, he, in my view, is not just talking about human nature, but is saying that in humans, it is very apparent that there is this self-relinquishing going on, but that it is not merely a human affect to self-relinquish. He says that substance itself is self-relinquishing and nature itself is self-relinquishing. And I think his whole point, or not his whole point, but a big point that he's trying to stress a lot, is that things that we think of as epistemological affects of being a person, like abstraction, and self-relinquishing and distantiation from concepts, etc., or distance from concepts. These things that we think of as human affects or problems in our cognition, he's trying to transpose, he's trying to move, he's trying to take it and say, that's not just a problem with our brains or our capacity for consciousness or our cognition. That's not just us failing to rise to the challenge. That is the world being built in such a way that it produced us, and we experience this flawedness directly. So nature is such that it produces subjects, and it self-relinquishes itself into this subjectivity. That's basically my point.
So I have this at least a similar reading to Ed, in the sense that my sense of nature. I mean, I don't deny that, you know, like it has these human aspects like human nature and all that, but that because he's concerned with things like extension, time, you know, he's concerned with these broad, I don't know if he would call them this, but broad metaphysical categories, that nature, at least part of what he's talking about there, is nature in the really broad sense. And another reason I say this, and maybe it's because the tiny bit of reading I've done on Hegel, you know, there are these discussions about what in the world is nature for Hegel. And when people ask that question, they're not typically talking about human nature. They're talking about what is nature, because nature, like there's some places where he says things like nature is calcified spirit, things of that sort. And when he says that, he's not talking about human nature. He's talking about nature as, you know, like nature conceived as, you know, in the sort of metaphysical ontological sense. But I guess what Hunter said last, I get the sense, as Hunter does, that so here, you know, a traditional way of thinking about the relation of the mind and the world, which is what all these idealists are struggling to deal with. Well, people have been struggling to deal with it since probably before Plato. But, you know, one conception is you have the world absent human consciousness, and the world just is whatever it is, and that's objective reality. And then human minds come into that world, and the question is, how does that stuff out there get in here? You know, so I have my own subjective world of consciousness, and all of you do, and then there's this objective natural world that just is what it is, that would be this whatever it is independently of human consciousness. That's objective reality. Traditionally, metaphysics was about what is that world like, and then how does that information get into the mind? And you see Descartes struggling with that, and then Hume struggling with that, and then Kant going, oh my God, Descartes and Kant had just pointed out, Descartes and Hume have just pointed out that there is no such thing. Well, that we have no, absolutely zero, unmediated access to a world independent of consciousness. Exactly zero. And so then you have some idealists like Berkeley saying, well, then there is no natural world, there is only mind. You have, like in my reading, Hume saying, being agnostic and saying, I don't know if there is a world outside the mind or not. I don't know. I can't possibly know. All I can know are my mental perceptions. So that's all I'm going to talk about. And then you have Descartes saying, oh, there is definitely a natural world. But the reason I know that is because there's a God that, you know, who wouldn't deceive me. But then Kant and the German idealist tradition are coming up with much more subtle ways of addressing that problem. And, you know, so for Kant claims the structure of the world is actually a kind of projection of the transcendental ego. And so the structure of the world is actually defined by my transcendental ego. And then this weird shit from the Noumena comes in and populates it with experience. And so then, you know, you got Fichte and Schelling that are giving riffs on what Kant is doing. And then by the time you get to Hegel, Hegel's trying to respond to that. And I don't really understand what Hegel's, but that's what I really would like to know, is kind of what Hegel's metaphysical view is. But I think the sense I get with Hegel is what Hunter was saying, is that, you know, so with Kant, each one of us has our own independent transcendental ego, and we all project our own independent time and space framework for existence. It just happens that because the transcendental ego is rational and reason is reason, every transcendental ego projects exactly the same spatial and temporal framework for us to have experience in. But it's still essentially my transcendental ego that's projecting my structure, and yours projecting your structures. Just fortunately, we all project the same kind of structure. But it sounds like what Hegel's doing, and you see this, these hints of it again in Fichte and Schelling, is that Hegel is saying that that subjectivity of the transcendental ego is not an individualized thing, but there is a kind of subjectivity in the cause, in the work, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what to call it, because he has different words. I don't know, reality, actuality, all these have technical meanings for Hegel that I don't understand. But that the whatever it is that is existence, there is a subjective character to the whole thing. And so it's not that I am a subjective consciousness that enters an objective world. It's that there is an essential subjectivity to existence itself. And then, like what Hunter was saying, and I thought this was an interesting move. This is what Hegel's saying, is then, because this almost sounds like somebody's, it reminds me of Deleuze, frankly, who wants to say that it's this sort of transhumanism, in a sense, that human subjectivity actually emerges from a broader subjectivity. And so, my subjective consciousness and its perceptions of nature and all of that are actually, I don't know what to say, a manifestation or some effect of this broader, I don't know what to call it, spirit, I guess, this essential cosmic subjectivity. And so that's where I think, that's why I think I'm wondering if part of the reason it gets confused is because, I think, I get the impression here, and I don't really understand how he's answering Hegel, but the fact that he's talking about, how he answers Kant, but the fact that he's talking about space and time and extension does to me, like Hunter says, whether he says the word Kant or not, he's responding to Kant's claim that the transcendental ego is what generates the spatial temporal framework for me to have my experience in. And it sounds like what Hegel is saying is that's true in a sense, but this subjectivity that you're referring to is not mine and yours. It is a broader subjectivity that is caught up in this dialectical cosmic activity, and that space and time are kind of manifestations of the way that whole system works. And then my personal subjectivity somehow, which I don't really understand, somehow is caught up in that as well. And then I guess the human nature and the natural world as a whole, maybe those are just, maybe nature as such is kind of related to this subjectivity viewed in this sort of cosmic sense, whereas perhaps human nature is sort of subjectivity as it manifests in this experience of individuality or something of that sort. But anyway, those are speculations based on the reading and on what Hunter said. But if I keep talking, I'm just going to repeat myself.
Yeah, I still just have very little conception, I think, of a lot of the stuff you're talking about, Nevitt. Maybe I can relate to you trying to listen to Hunter in this sense, that I feel like, it's like you tried to sort of summarize, like, I feel like your entire philosophical understanding leading up to Hegel, and it's a lot for me, but I will just kind of say some of the things that I've been thinking, because I guess, I'm reminded of like really early on when we were talking to this about Hegel, and we were talking about history, an adjective and then history. And I just remember saying like something about how I felt like it's sort of like history was this thing outside of us, like outside of something that we could like feel or that could be like a part of us. And I guess when I see like nature and history as these things, and like this sort of like we're entering absolute knowing. I made a joke to Hunter yesterday about how he should force Matt Squires to join in on the last seminar, and so he would like read the preface and then read the end, and then he'd be good. And I guess I was thinking about that right now because it's like, in a sense, I guess we're back where we started, in some sense. It's like we are I feel like we are returning to a lot of things I read early on, and I'm hearing like in this passage, hearing a lot of things that I can kind of reference back to Hunter. And like, I was thinking of like us returning back where we are, but being in a different place, and like the Mobius strip and stuff like that, and these ideas that are kind of, that have been sort of, I guess, jammed into my head for long enough, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that like we have reached absolute knowing, and I have absolutely no way of like doing anything about this. It's like I can't, like, if the statements, if this if the sort of statements that we can make about absolute knowing are like I'm speaking a language right now, then it's like it feels like we're back where we started. It's like we are making very simple statements and then trying to really actually understand what those mean, and that's kind of, I guess, this process that's been going on in this whole book. I guess I get the sense, especially with this sort of nature and history and this word relinquish, that like I feel like we're having to give up on the idea of absolute knowing in some sense, like that we have to give up the idea that all this can sort of be applied to nature and history as we knew it before we read this book. And to say that like nature and history are these things outside of us is to ignore like all that we have done. It's like human nature isn't to say that it's like separate from nature. It is nature within us. It is us trying to apply what nature is to our own self, to our experience, to who we are. And that's, I guess I see history as this similar sort of thing. It's like we see it as outside of us. We see it as this thing that we can't control. But we are, but in reality, we're relinquishing ourselves to it. We're giving it that control. We are sort of recognizing at the end of the day, no matter how many statements we make, that there is something outside of us that we cannot control, and we can sort of make decisions on what exactly we relinquish. But then, again, it's like I don't know, I guess I just feel like I can really relate to this sort of idea of returning back to something, giving it the exact sort of like the exact chance that you gave before. Like I'm just thinking about this experience, I guess, of like trying to learn something, like maybe from an experience, from you having a friendship or a relationship, and you exit out of that relationship and you try to learn something from it. At some point, you can no longer apply the things you've learned to like whatever you are at this moment, because you are no longer in that relationship. So you're trying to apply an experience that you had to something that you are no longer in. And I feel like, I guess in my experience, I've reached a point where it's like I can't really like actively and sort of consciously apply the things I've learned to what I'm doing. Like at a certain point, I just have to relinquish that. I have to say that I don't know if I've really learned anything. And then still try and do it again. And then when you're doing it again, you realize that of course you've learned something, like you're a different person, and if you try to like apply those things sort of in a direct way, then you would be ignoring the differences. So you have to give it up, you have to relinquish, but you also can't help but recollect, like the in a sense you can't forget the things that have happened to you, they are a part of you. And so like you will try and relinquish, and you will try and sort of move on in a sense, but you're different, you're here, he says, in a higher level. I don't know about that or I don't know, what he's trying to say exactly there, but I think it's fundamentally different. You have this experience that you're approaching the world with now, and I guess I see like history as being that, like this sort of past that you're trying to learn from, but you can never apply it directly to the situation you're in, because there are always so many circumstances that alter it, that make you feel like it's different. And then you find yourself returning to those same things in the act of fighting against it, I guess. So I don't know. I feel like hopefully I said some meaningful things in there, but I can relate to sort of that experience. And I can look at this book as sort of this whole returning into itself, this sort of like, we are trying to do something really from the beginning, and then we just return where we were, but we did something, we had to have done something, right? We had to have learned something. Come on, and it's like, I guess to me it's like sometimes that feels like the only way to learn, because to learn in this sort of logical, rational way is to ignore like time, I guess, the like change and the circumstances that are like constantly changing around us.
What I was thinking of when Nevitt and Hunter and Travis were talking, if I am interpreting y'all correctly, is that what Hegel is saying is that it doesn't matter what nature is, because we can't know nature or history away from our subjective understanding of it. And we think we have more than a subjective understanding because we are able to share that subjective understanding with other human beings. But the other human beings that share that subjective understanding with us doesn't make it less subjective. It's just that we have sense perceptions. We process, as human beings, we process information somewhat similarly. To use a phrase, we're all carbon-based life forms. And so we share this ground of being, which I guess is nice, but there's no way we're going to be able to know these things directly, and that we should understand that and accept it, and don't pretend that we actually have the subjective understanding. And I'm not sure if he says why we shouldn't, besides it being, for lack of a better term, empirically incorrect, or if he thinks there's other dangers involved. Did I misunderstand you all?
I mean, I don't know. I guess I feel like
that really sums up everything in this reading for me, because like I feel like I have a dim understanding, and then I try to talk about, I'm like, I don't know. So
for me it comes down to like I'd word it differently, I guess, and maybe that's really important. I just, because like I don't know, I guess to me it's like it's not that you can't get that understanding, it's just that after a certain amount of time, all the understanding that you have has to be relinquished, and you have to try to get it again. you know, that you have to give it up, that there are things that will come to you that break whatever it is that there still is that understanding. Like you still come to important understandings, and there's not sort of like you shouldn't give up on trying to understand things. It's just that like there will be things like nature and history that return to you and force you to relinquish that understanding. But it's not fully relinquished. Like it's not gone. It's within you. You know, it's like the process of you coming to that understanding and giving up. Like you can't get rid of it. It reminds me of Nietzsche, and like I think about this a lot. Like this idea of like, you know, like rejecting Christianity, but like recognizing that in your rejection it is like maybe even deeper within you than it would be as a Christian. You know, it's like you are like making a statement against it and you're giving it up, but in that giving up, it can never leave you. You know, it's like you can't, because you can't actually give up that part of you. You know, you can't stop that from having happened to you, or from that being who you were at some point, you know. And so in a sense, it's like you giving it up is like it's you have a better understanding having given it up than you did before that, when you thought it was true.
That to me sounds like sublation, you know, that you know, because when these two oppositions collide and then one is overcome, but that the overcome one never completely disappears. It just becomes, you know, like sedimented or something. So I don't know, that seems consistent. One thing that, you know, Ed mentioned Buddhism, and so this reading prompted some sort of Buddhist reflections on my part, which may be completely off base, but the Kyoto school of Zen Buddhism actually liked German idealists a lot. And so they at least saw some parallels, but there's this trope in at least in Zen Buddhism that says, talking about the transformation of consciousness, and they say first there is a mountain, and then there is no mountain, and then there is a mountain again. And the idea is, and they're dealing with the subject object distinction, which at least in some sense Hegel is dealing with as well, that there's something about I guess the ground of reality, the subjectivity, that necessarily posits an object in which to know itself. And you know, so in Zen you get this thing of, you know, the reason that I experience myself as a subject is because there are objects. And so this is a thing that shows up in 20th century phenomenology, this notion of intentionality, that consciousness is always conscious of something. And so you have subject and object, but then in some of these states that Zen meditation makes possible, what can happen is the subject object distinction can kind of dissolve, and then there is just sort of pure subjectivity, or what they sometimes call pure consciousness. And so there's this just pure awareness. So there is awareness, but there is no awareness of objects, but there is awareness. And so that's when, you know, so first there is the consciousness and the mountain. And then there's just consciousness. And then in the next moment, there is the mountain reappears as an object, but there's a transformation that has happened to where subjective experience is aware of what, in a sense, what its real subjective nature is. And so the object returns, but it's one's, I don't know if understanding is even the right word, but one's experience of the world is fundamentally transformed by having had that middle experience. And I mean, I kind of, you know, reading this stuff on Hegel makes me think there's something similar going on, because in the first pages of this thing, he seemed to be talking about this, like I said before Hunter got here, one of the big themes that seems to be running through this whole thing is this recovery of unity, that the dialectic is sort of a process of positing the other, and then incorporating the other, and then that posits another other, and then that one's incorporated, and then that posits another one, and that one's incorporated. And so, here in Absolute Knowing, again, you have just a phrase in the, a few lines down, the very first paragraph: the overcoming of the object of consciousness is not to be taken one-sidedly, and so on. And so I wonder if he's dealing with something similar, and that maybe, I don't know, but maybe Absolute Knowing is kind of like that third state where, and I don't know if I really don't know if he's talking about subjective individual human consciousness, or if he's talking about some sort of cosmic subjective motion or movement, or maybe both. But that there's this, when you go through this process, or I don't know, when the spirit goes this process, there's all these objects that get posited and then they're sublated and posited and sublated and posited and sublated. And then at the end, Absolute Knowing perhaps is this sudden, or not sudden, but this awareness of what's been happening this whole time. And it's just like, that's what's going on. And so maybe, Absolute Knowing isn't maybe so much as now I know everything, but it's just this state of, I don't know what, awareness of being, where the spirit comes to recognition of what's really going on here. But then it just cranks up and starts all over again. Like I said, like there is a mountain, and then there is no mountain, and then there is a mountain, and off we go again. And so I don't know, like I said, the Kyoto school thought there's strong parallels between, Hegel and some of these guys and Zen experience. I don't know if that's correct. And so maybe that's a false analogy, but that's something that occurred to me.
Nevitt, I was thinking when you were talking that I'm glad you said what you said. It's when we try to get down to a molecular level about what it means to know or experience, and I know I'm borrowing this from my little bit of reading from phenomenology, but is the etymologist, is that the correct term for insect studiers? The phylum and the genus and all that of the butterfly. Does he or she know butterflies? Or what about the child who has never seen a butterfly before, doesn't have any conceptual scheme whatsoever, doesn't have the word bug, insect, butterfly, but just is experiencing that thing flying, fluttering its wings on a spring day? And I would think if we don't have the concepts, right? If we don't have all of these words, that we instantly start to categorize. And categorization is part of knowing, for part of what we mean to know, but it can also interfere with us knowing the individuality of every single thing we come into contact with.
Yeah, and Hunter spoke to something like this, and so maybe you and I are completely off base. I don't know, but that sounds like something is going on like that, because you have to, in order to, let's see, understanding in the sense of, understanding is a technical term for Hegel and for Kant, but the normal mode of understanding requires conceptual analysis, and there's certain ways that the world is made accessible to us through conceptual analysis. And I think Hegel, and as far as Kant concerns, that's the only access we have to the world is through conceptual analysis. That's it. Anything else is bound to generate illusions and antinomies and falsehoods. But I think what Hegel is suggesting is that conceptual analysis, why it's essential, it, in a sense, as Nietzsche might say, falsifies reality in a way. And that and I really don't understand how, but that Hegel thinks, I don't know what, there's modes of reasoning, because he wouldn't say understanding, but there's modes of dialectical reasoning that somehow give us, I don't know what the word would be, because again, I can't use understanding since it has that technical meaning, but it somehow gives us, I don't know what, cognitive access or experiential access or something like that to features of what is happening that conceptual analysis obscures. Again, that doesn't mean conceptual analysis is bad. It just means it's limited and it blocks us from experiencing certain aspects of the world. Like you said, and I think, Hegel deals with this at the very beginning of the book, the idea of an absolute individual that we do not conceptualize is unintelligible, because the only way we understand what things are is through concepts. And so like you said, to encounter a truly individual entity, maybe there is some mode of encounter, but it's not going to be understanding. It's going to be something else. So anyway, I get a similar sense that something like that's happening, but what exactly, I don't know.
Okay. Well, I mean, in terms of I guess, give, yeah. I just read the chat. Yeah. I guess, in terms of my capacity to kind of respond to the idea of when you said you don't really know, or you're not really certain what is happening in that mode where it's not really understanding. I think there was a part actually where he talks about the different domains of perception and understanding. And I am currently looking for it. Yes, it's at the beginning of the book, or at the beginning of the reading. Here, hold on, let me set this down. Okay, at the beginning of the reading on page 455. Yes, okay, on page 455. Section 789. I think maybe a little bit in the end of 788, but mostly just 789. The point of that section to me is for him to, this is part of his game of catching us up and saying okay, right now, this conversation that we're having is kind of trying to retread the steps, or to try and produce a cognitive map for ourselves as to how we got from where we were, which was basic concepts like this is a thing, or there is a thing in front of me, to saying crazy stuff like spirit is the self-reflecting circle, blah, 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 and he's trying to say, okay, let's slow it down. Let's say, okay, where do we start, and he starts off by saying self-consciousness posits itself as the object, and the object is itself, and it's already sublated the self-relinquishing and its otherness to one of itself, yada, yada, yada. And he says, this is the movement of consciousness. This is what I think, Nevitt, this is kind of what I identified with when you were talking about how there is a mountain, now there is no mountain, now there is a mountain. It seems like this is where he's saying, he would say that is the movement of consciousness, right? To do this self-sublate, to sublate the thing and say, no, there is no mountain, it's just me. And then to say, well, what are you? But just you. You know what I mean? And what are you but an aspect of this substance? Oh, I got to self-sublate. Oh, but then who's sublating myself? I guess that's me. Well, then I got to self-sublate the self-sublation, and then it's just and he sees that, I think, based on the beginning of this section, he sees this sort of, in a way, circular, this sort of chasing of one's tail of saying there is a mountain, there is no mountain, in a cycle. He sees that as just the kind of natural movement of consciousness. And in fact, I think that he would say that it's a natural movement of consciousness on account of the fact that that is the natural movement of things, consciousness included, is this very tenuous relationship to the notion of stability, which I think he's saying here in this reading, I think he's saying that we maybe overvalue the notion of stability of a concept. But So, okay, but he also, I think he critiques process. He critiques purely processal thought. And I'll tell you how I think he does that. In section 789 on page 455, he talks about this thing called the infinite judgment. I don't know where he's brought it up earlier in the book, but my basic sense of the infinite judgment, or what infinite judgment is the capacity to identify the highest with the lowest. This is where I think James Joyce is coming from with the main impetus of Ulysses, is the identity of pooping and the beauty of matrimony, or my genitals and Eastern mysticism, or, the identity of something filthy and stupid to something sublime and divine and holy. You know what I mean? The highest and the lowest. I think, and this is also what Hegel was saying when he said spirit is a bone. I think that spirit is a bone was an example of this infinite judgment. So he tries to make it as explicit as possible here. He says the object is partly immediate when we confront an object. He's trying to give everybody their cookie. He's trying to give every person that comes to the table their due diligence, their pats on the back, saying where they're correct and giving them the credit that they're due. He's trying to hand out a medal to every form of thinking that is involved in this. And he says, so the object is partly immediate. We have spent way too long talking about the immediate to argue that it's not. So the object is partly immediate. It is consciousness is coming to be other to itself. I come to be other to myself through my relationship to objects. My relationships to objects gives me the notion that I am in a world of object, and thus I can logically deduce that I am also an object. And thus I can come to be other to myself only through objects. This is where I think a lot of people get confused with this notion of mutual recognition, where he says that self-consciousness is operative only on the basis of another consciousness or whatever. But I think that objects themselves, right? Any object, not just a potentially conscious automaton like another person, like that is the key to my self-understanding. There's a misreading of Hegel, but it's a misreading I sometimes employ when I'm talking to people who don't know anything about Hegel. I'll say this kind of kitschy phrase sometimes. I'll say, what Hegel says, one person can be certain, but two people can know. You know what I'm saying? And I'll use that as kind of like a selling point when I'm trying to convince a friend to join in on some devious, plan of mine or whatever, or when they have a hunch and I have a hunch and I'm trying to give us a confirmation bias to get them confident. I'll say two people. Now that's knowledge. You know what I mean? But I think that Hegel, I think that Hegel is saying that it goes beyond that it's objects in general that give us this sense of ourselves. Objects themselves operate as this sort of mirror. We always already find ourselves in the world. Part determinateness. Okay. Now we're going to go back to talking about objects. We're going to talk about objects. Objects are partly determinate. That's where perception comes in. This is the domain of perception. This is where perception perceives, it sees what's determinate, it sees what's solid. And it is part universal essence, which is the domain of the understanding. The understanding's job, or the understanding's typical role in our typical thought, is that it really digs into things. It really gets into the heart of the matter, or the essence of what's really going on with this. Sorry, I'm hitting my mic. This object that was in front of me. It's this universal essence as a part of the object and a part of my cognition that belongs to the understanding. And then he says, okay, so we can say that it's partly immediate, it's partly determinate, it's partly universal, la, 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 la. We have found these parts through our analysis through the duration of this book. Now that we're here at kind of the end, let's look at what we can say about the object. Can I say that it's determinate? Well, kinda. Can I say that it's universal? Well, kinda. Can I say that it's immediate? Kinda. What can I say about all of those things? I can say that the object is a syllogism. It is a syllogism being like an argument. An argument, like an argument based on a set of principles or propositions, right? Or what is it? The truth of the precedence guarantees the truth of the conclusion, or whatever that P word is.
it's just a syllogistic argument as to the nature of the thing that's in front of us. And the conclusion to that syllogism could be that the thing is not, that there is no mountain, or that there is a mountain. The mountain itself is a syllogism arguing that it is there, that it isn't there, that it is there, that it isn't there. It moves from individual to universal and vice versa. It doesn't have spiritual essentiality yet, but it is observing reason, finding itself as the being of the I as a thing. And he says that the statement, the being of the I is a thing, right? He says that, he says and he says it in, like, basically in quotes. I mean, he says it in italic. Don't forget to come back to the non-processual aspect. Yes. He says, observing reason finds self. The being of the I is a thing. The being of the I is a thing. That's the statement that consciousness is saying to itself in this state. It's telling itself. He's looking at consciousness like a specimen under glass, and he's watching what the consciousness does. And he says that the consciousness, the observing reason, says, the being of my I is a thing. You know what I mean? He's looking at the consciousness. He's saying, this consciousness seems to think that the being of its I is a thing. And what does that mean? He says, well, this would be an example of infinite judgment, which would be the identity of the highest and the lowest. So the being of the I for him is not really a thing in the sense that it's this immediate identity, but it can be in the infinite judgment, or it can be seen as such in the infinite judgment. So what's my point? There is a, yes, Descartes, exactly, Descartes. I am a thinking thing. I am a thing. I am a thinking thing, or I'm a spiritual thing, or I'm a physical thing, or blah, blah. He goes on to critique this in more detail later, but the important part is that this modality of infinite judgment, this movement of consciousness, this mountain being there and then not being there, this is the space that we kind of find ourselves in when we don't know what he's talking about. When we, like, I find myself here, is like, I don't know what, like, I'm reading, let's say I'm reading Hegel, like I was literally last night, and I was in this is not a hypothetical. I do not have to imagine very hard to believe that this could happen, where I could read Hegel, read a whole paragraph and go, what is he talking about? And when I do that, I am undulating, I'm moving, I'm saying, oh, okay, so it's subject. Oh no, so it's not quite subject. It's the external. It's this world of production that produces the, oh, but no. It's subject self-relinquishing, but then it's subject that's doing the self-relinquishing. So it has to be subject. You see what I'm saying? And I can go on and on and on and on and on infinitely into this sort of rabbit hole, or this spiral, this vertigo-inducing spiral of the mountain is there, now it's not. He has a problem with this, and he lays out this problem very early into Absolute Knowing in 789, on page 455. He basically says, the problem is that this does not have spiritual essentiality yet. This does not have spiritual essentiality yet. It is just moments. And this, I think, would be his sort of not prophetic, but his anticipatory response to process philosophy. And in fact, I bet I could find the statement in 789. Yes, at about 3/4 of the way through the paragraph, on, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 lines from the bottom. He says, for that reason, the object does not yet appear in consciousness as such as the spiritual essentiality in the way that we just expressed it. And the conduct of consciousness in regard to the object is neither that of considering it in this totality as such, nor that of considering it in its purely conceptual form. Rather, it is in part a shape of consciousness per se, and in part a number of such shapes that we gather together, right? In which the totality of the moments of the object and the content of consciousness can be pointed out only as having been dissolved into the totality's moments. So his basic critique of processal philosophy, or of process philosophy there, is that it just leaves things as moments. And this does not necessarily conflict with Calcavage's reading of spirit as process. Not at all. Not at all does it necessarily conflict with Calcavage saying spirit is a process. It's all a process. Yes, we could say that. But also, these words on this page are not moving. They're not like jumping out at me in some sort of psychedelia or changing. You know what I mean? There's some sort of constancy, even if it's an illusory constancy or what seems like a contingent constancy. There's some sort of spiritual essentiality to these moments, to these movements. And the example that he would say is it's kind of like the rebuttal to relativism, where people say everything is relative. There are no universal truths. And then every guy like me who hears that and likes to have witty comebacks will say, is that a relative or is that a universal truth or is that an exception? Is that just, do you kind of ignore that one? You know what I mean? And then they're like, you're using like a loophole. Fuck you. You know, that one's, I don't know. He would say, so everything's a process, right? And even this diagnosis of process. Are you saying that, and let's just give them full credit. What is a process? A non-stable thing, a thing that doesn't stay the same. Well, if you say that it's a process and the process is a process, doesn't mean that in its process as a process, it will be a thing. You know what I mean? If it's changing, if it's a changing process, then it has to at some point not just be a process. It has to have some sort of stability, you know? And it's like, okay, so he's saying there is some, and he's not saying like, gotcha, I'm an advocate for essentiality and universalism, and I just proved my point. He's not saying that, I don't think. I think that what he's saying is just that even in compelling and reasonable arguments for process, there is a spiritual essentiality which undergirds it, which supports it and sustains it. And in all of our arguments of spiritual essentiality, there is a process of its unfolding. Every attempt at stability is transient and dynamic. Every assertion of dynamism and transience is static. You see what I'm saying? He's kind of that, I think. But couldn't you say that the only stability is the form of the process, while process itself is unstable?
Yeah, I'm thinking, yes, like, couldn't you say, okay, we're going to call this dialectic? Or I mean, I don't know if that, but okay, so dialectic is stable in the sense that describes how the process operates, but the process is still constant movement. I mean, that's what I mean kind of by the form. I guess I'm missing, are you saying more than that? There is more stability than just the form of the process?
I think, let me see, because there's a moment where he talks about stability. Yes, I see where it is. Okay, I found it. He actually talks about stability in a very interesting way on page 464. On page 464 in sections 803 and 804. That's where this would be, 803 and 804. He says, basically, the I is the equality of this is just preface, so don't worry about this too much, but I'm going to get to the important part. The I is the equality of the self with itself. It's just as much subject as it is substance. Spirit, he says, but spirit is not pure inwardness nor pure externality. It's estrangement and movement between both as a coming to be of the pure I, right? And he's talking about this spirit as the coming to be of the pure I. This is in 804. The non-being of its difference. He says, this is the fourth line from the top of 804. He says, rather, it has shown itself to be this movement of the self, which relinquishes itself of itself and immerses itself in its substance, and which likewise as subject has both taken the inward turn into itself from out of the substance and has made its substance into an object and a content, just as it is sublated this difference between objectivity and content, that first reflection of immediacy, blah, blah, blah. It's coming to be of the pure I. Okay, and skip down a few lines. While this difference is the pure doing of the I equals I, the content and necessity of the sunrise of existence, substance for its essence, which stability is for itself. That's actually no, I shouldn't skip over those lines. In fact, actually halfway through 804, I just kind of tried to skip over those, but then I realized that they're actually saying something kind of interesting or kind of profound. While this difference is the pure doing of the I equals I, the concept is both the necessity and the sunrise of existence, which has that substance for its essence and which stably is for itself. However, the stability of existence for itself is the concept posited into determinateness, and as a result is likewise the concept's movement in its own self downwards into the simple substance, which as this negativity in this movement is initially subject. So what is my point? What is my point? There is this idea of stability when we're trying to critique process. I see the point that you're making when it comes to, okay, actually I just saw the name Schelling in the chat and I didn't read the text all that was sent in the chat, but this makes me think of Schelling very, very definitively. And that reminded me of a note that I wanted to kind of bring forward in terms of that's about Schelling. I think that a very important part of this whole thing that I see coming up again and again is this Schellingian inspiration of Hegel, and the aspect that I think Hegel most readily or regularly identifies with or employs from Schelling is the indivisible remainder, the thing that can't be sublated. Imagine sublation as like a blender, you know what I mean? That's trying to take two concepts in this really Bertrand Russellian way, this Bertrand Russell way, where he's like, you take like red and blue and you blend them together and you make purple. And that's dialectical in a way. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, let's pretend that that's the case. Let's just imagine that that's how that works. If that were the case, the only accurate way to represent dialectics in this blender machine that we're putting theses and antitheses into would be that it would blend them up and then spit out some new thing, but there would always be this kernel, this grain of sand, or this kernel of corn in the machine, this little nugget, this substantial piece, but maybe not just substantial, maybe just subjective. Oh, you know what I mean? It's only there because you see it, or it's there because I'm seeing it because it's substantial. There is this indivisible remainder to all these dialectical processes, to all this sublation. There's always something that refuses to be sublated. And you know what that is? That's sublation being sublated. That's the sublation of sublation, which is sublation. Sublation is the sublation of sublation. I know that sounds like I'm actually an insane person trying to trick you, but like sublation is the sublation of sublation in the sense that if we take a naive definition of sublation, we think of it as this holistic totality thing. But even sublation in its totality would therefore logically have to go back on itself and would have to sublate itself, and therefore would have to be a sublated sublation, which would be this thing that just produces this novelty without totally destroying the thing that it had. It preserves that kernel. This kernel, this indivisible remainder, is the foundation for neo-Hegelianism. This is the fundamental concept of contemporary neo-Hegelian readings, where they say that people try to come up with all kinds of different words for this indivisible thing, this nugget, this grain of sand in the machine that refuses to be sublated. People have called it less than nothingness. People have called it, enjoyment or excess. People have called it a negativity. People have called it positivity or collection, thought, cognition, whatever. There's just this unsublatable part. So this is the kind of logical ground from which he is saying that there really is a spiritual essentiality to our dynamism. That spiritual essentiality is something like, or is present in, as an example, this unsublated thing. What is my point when I bring up this unsublatable grain of sand, this indivisible remainder? Well, I think that if we go back to what we were talking about in this interaction of the subject with the object, this dynamic of the person in the mountain, and in fact back to nature. I want to bring it back to nature to really try and ground us in an actual definition of nature, right? When I try to describe my nature, let's say I were talking to some sort of naturalist who really wanted to get me in a public debate. He really wanted to get to really trick me or get one over on me in front of a crowd. And I said, I don't have any nature, right? He would say, that's a natural thing to say, or it would be in your nature to say that, right? You know, because the concept of nature, the way in which we deploy the concept nature, you're right, Nevin, it's this broad metaphysical thing like time and space and extension. And it operates in this fundamentally, imminently dual-sided way, where not only am I saying nature, like, when he says nature, I'm not saying me. I want to take the focus off of me, because it's not me that's doing it, it's Hegel. When Hegel says nature with italics, he's not only talking about nature itself, like as far as we can functionally speak about it at all within the realm of possibility. Not only is he saying, like, straight up being totally honest with you, like if you ask him, if you're like, are you fucking around? Are you lying? Are you just using like somebody else's definition of nature to try and mock them? Is that what you're doing? He would say, no, this is nature. For you to say that this isn't nature would be to deny the functional or the actual productive work of the naturalists. He would say, you need to take them seriously, or else they are going to defeat you in some sort of, contest of concepts, if you're going to have one, it's nature not only insofar as it really is, as we can really say that it is, but it is also nature in the sense that people employ it, in the way that we speak about it. He sees this as being this immanent connection, in being able to talk about nature not only as a rhetorical strategy for doofuses who want to make arguments like that incest is good or something, or that it's bad or whatever. Like, not only is he saying nature like those guys would say, but also he's like, in the same breath, with the same word, in the same instance, with the same text, he is saying nature, straight up. Nature, how like things are natural, like that, like the way things are, like that sort of nature. Okay. And when I say it, it makes you think things, right? Okay, well, think about those things it makes you think. All right, let's investigate that. Why does it make you think those things? Let's talk about that. Where did that come from? You know what I mean? And his argument is that nature, like extension, and he said that extension is a better example than light, because light is this thing we kind of experience and kind of interpret. It's kind of connected to Beelzebub because he was the archangel of light and music, I think. There's this relationship to light that we have, but he was like, forget light. Light is like this revealer of things. That's not our business. We just are things. Things just straight up are. The world could be dark. The world could be eternally cast into darkness, and I would still bump my toe on the coffee table and sprain it, because things still have extension. He's talking about metaphysical concepts in this general way. He's trying to produce a space where we can think of this immanent reflexivity to the use of terms as we use them, in order to produce a space of self-knowing and self-relinquishing, simultaneous self-knowing and self-relinquishing, in the act of engagement and enunciation with a concept like nature or extension, wherein we can enter a space of enunciation in the shape of the spirit that is enunciating, i.e. absolute knowing, which is this economy, this fluidity, this freedom from fixity, this ultimate dynamism in a way. Yes, a dynamism, but Yeah, like a Descartes Zoroastrianism. It's like weird. Yeah. It's this dynamism, but at the same time as there is this ultimate inequality and dynamism and a pure difference. He argues for pure difference in this section. And I pogged. Sorry, that's a contemporary term for I gasped. I was shocked. I was absolutely flabbergasted when I saw he said pure difference. He just says it. Whoa. So not only is it a dynamism beset by pure difference, but it's an identity, the identity of thinking and being in this space of reflexivity. And he's making the kind of bold claim that it's like, you don't even have to get to lofty heights of intellectualism or philosophy to get to this reflexivity. You're already doing that. And that's how like babies learn things. You know what I mean? Like that fire burns, things like that. You know what I mean?
I'm sorry.
I really have a short thing I just wanted to throw out that it was like a while ago that we were kind of talking about the kind of the process idea. The only kind of reason I feel like I'm inclined to oppose, I guess, calling it a process is just that I feel like anytime we think of ourselves as not as being in like, oh, I'm just in a process, I feel like an end sort of leaks into it. Like we sort of think about the ending whether or not we want to, you know, and I guess I feel like that sort of is always this thing. And I don't know why. I don't really have an argument as to why. I guess that's just something that I feel in myself mostly, but I also feel like I guess maybe like the fact that we were gonna die, you know, it's like no matter how much this like we think of life as a process, we know there's an end to it. And so like we kind of translate that into I think our experience in a lot of ways. And so I guess I just see like a danger in calling something a process, because then you might be ignoring uh the end of that process. Yeah, I guess, you know, like the fact that that process has to end. Um and yeah, I don't know, I guess to me it feels like a way of sort of like trying to escape like the problems of that, I guess. I don't know, but like I guess I feel like Hegel is very purposefully not calling it a process. At least in this last section. Like I really do feel like he could have said, oh, this is just a process, you know, we're never done or whatever. But I think he recognizes that there's sort of like in the relinquishing there is an end, but we just start over. Like we keep going, you know, and so the, you know, I know that calling it a process doesn't necessarily imply that there's no end or that you're ignoring the end, but I guess I feel like this implication within there, so I kind of try to avoid it generally, but you know, it's kind of my perspective on it.
Okay, go ahead, Joseph, actually, please.
No, yeah, the other thing I was going to comment on is, first off, it's really helpful to hear a neo-Hegelian interpretation and comparing it to a Kalkovich interpretation. I feel like I can move on to the next sublation of reading Zizek next, which I'm not sure if I'm ready for that, but we'll try. The other is I really liked the concept in the phenomenology that this is more of like a poetic experience that anybody can approach. It's not some elite class of philosophers. Anybody can experience this suffering of learning. It just requires the process of this learning. And I thought that was a striking moment. It's not some, you know, this is approachable to anyone that wants to take it on as an educated process, rather than having it be part of the elite, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, and Hunter was talking earlier about like he was talking about reading and kind of not understanding and applying that to this like there is a mountain, there's not a mountain kind of idea. And I don't know, I guess the like I feel like one of the things that I sort of vouch for in some sense is like being okay with the mountain being gone, you know, is like accepting that lack of understanding, accepting the fact that, you know, it's like there isn't truly like, maybe on the other side of this process thing, there isn't really truly an end, there's not like a point where you understand everything. Like even the person who was creating this didn't really know fully what they were doing, and so to approach a book and try to fully grasp an idea, it's like he wouldn't have wrote this book if the idea was fully grasped. It's like the book was the process of him trying to grasp the idea, so it's like we cannot fully understand it. There is necessarily an aspect of confusion, and to be comfortable with that confusion is something that I find very important, and something that I think like is ignored a lot of the time in sort of critical reading or teaching. And, it's like there's just so much focus on understanding that and getting a good grade or kind of completing something that a lot of time there isn't this recognition of the failure that leads to that, of the confusion that has to exist before you can understand something, before you can actually, and again, you're not actually fully understanding it, but you're getting closer, and so you're on a different level, I guess I would say, than you were before. And yeah, so I think that is just something like Hunter was talking about it, and I felt like I could sort of relate to that to sort of my, like, I guess a belief that I have. I don't know.
Boom, dialectics, absolute knowing. That sounds like it to me. I mean, it really does. I'm going to reiterate what Hunter said there, positing the approachability, because I felt the same way during this process. I'm still confused, but I feel like it's developmental confusion in a way.
It's dude, like I sincerely, I feel like this seminar has only lasted like 10 minutes. I feel like for the amount of like stuff that is going on in this section, that I feel like we could just like, okay, let's hunker down and talk about. It's like, but just the chapter is called Absolute Knowing, you know what I mean? And I agree. Yes, it's not okay. I think that Travis, your idea of like it, like being okay with not totally understanding, right? You know what I mean? That sort of like being at peace with that sort of thing. The way in which you're saying that, like, you're not being like if I were like a total asshole and I wanted to just like to just critique you for, okay, if I had no sense, if I were like if I just had no sense of anything, and I were like a Ben Shapiro type who was just like, let's analyze the facts, you factually said that you would be okay with not understanding, that means you like stupidity. And like I could say that you are like an advocate for anti-intellectualism and are like an agent of the devil or of like the destruction of the West. I could say that. But the way in which you present that, not maybe the way, but the presentation itself of the concept of in the frame of absolute knowing, that we're not, I mean, you're not just saying naively with a sense of simple unity. You're not saying with a sense of simplicity and simple unity that ignorance is good. That's not what you're saying, right? What you're what it seems, at least to me, is what you're saying, right? Is something that I completely agree with, which is that yeah, is like you can accept or internalize ignorance. This is what I've been saying since day freaking one, that like it's not the abolition of ignorance, but the total internalization of ignorance, where you can internalize that ignorance and then not say, because it's like people who would critique you for saying that would already imply within you saying that a contradictory like this okay, let me okay, I'm really trying to like say this clearly, that for me to critique you for saying that ignorance is good would be to say that you think that ignorance is good except for being ignorant about ignorance. which would really be me critiquing you for your certainty, which means that me critiquing you for saying that ignorance is good is coming from a place of insisting on ignorance. Do you get that? You see that? Like, and
Yes,
so,
I think I do. I really I genuinely think I do. And it's
yes.
yeah.
Just the point is, I guess, that I agree with what you're saying, because it's an internalization of ignorance without that immediate, like, ignorance is good except for this one. It's ignorance is not necessarily a negative thing, right? That's the first kind of difference. But then with the assumption or the internalization of the contradictory nature of you saying that, you are saying it with the notion of like if Ben Shapiro said, you know, that's a non-ignorant statement, you would be like, well, yeah, no, duh. What else am I gonna do? You know what I mean? But how else am I gonna make this point? What am I supposed to do? Are you saying that there's just this realm of knowledge that's supposed to be off limits? And if so, you're arguing that ignorance is good. Every possible critique of saying that ignorance is good is grounded on arguing that ignorance is good. You know what I mean? So I totally support you in saying that. You know, at least maybe, and I'm not saying you're saying ignorance is good, but insisting or asserting the value of the internalization of ignorance. I think, I don't know, there's like, I vehemently agree. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, oh no, Jackson, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're almost finished with the last meeting. What have we learned? Ignorance is good.
Yeah, I agree. Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, I for me, and again, this is not me. This is Kalkovich, and this kind of summed it up for me and helped me a little bit when I was reading this section. He said, for Hegel, it is the philosophical image for world history as the saga of man's self-alienation in modern culture, and an event. At an even deeper level, it is the image for the philosophical logos that discloses the finite and infinite. Man and God are united in time. Philosophy must go down in order to genuinely go up. It must produce the rational form of loss and death in order for man to experience his life as truly his own, as the earthly embodiment of his divine self-knowledge. To me, I found that really helpful. I can put it in the chat for summing up a little bit of clarity for absolute knowing.
Yeah, I guess, you know, like in general, and perhaps, I mean, even in the literature seminars recently with the Rebel, I guess I've just felt like there's like a lot of opportunities to misinterpret I guess what I'm saying, and like and I guess I feel like that is just the consequence of trying to say anything, you know. And so I try to engage with that very directly, and you know, try and not be afraid of saying things that like kind of immediately I would question, you know, or I have this immediate sort of reaction to, you know. And that's like, you know, I guess one of the things I think that, like, you know, I don't even necessarily see it. I couldn't say that I see it directly, I guess, in anything Hegel said, but like, I know that Hunter has talked about it in terms of like his interpretation of Hegel. And I think it's like, you know, if there is anything that I am taking for granted or like totally accepting without any thought, I need to stop doing that. I need to like try and oppose that and just like see what happens, you know. And I might end up saying something that I don't want to say, you know, but I guess I feel like there's some value in that, you know. And so like, almost saying things that sort of immediately sound kind of strange, or could very easily be misinterpreted. I feel like there's this value in it because you are interacting with like this fundamental problem of language and communication, and so it's like, and again, I just feel like that's like what Hegel is trying to do a lot of the time. Is like, it's like how can we engage with the things that we can't engage with? It's just like how we have this entire structure, we have this philosophy as this idea that has been built up for so long. It's like, how do we engage with the aspects of this that have become impossible to engage with? And I really respect that aspect of it, and coming into it, it was like, I felt like I was ready to sort of not understand things, because I can do that, and I read all the time, and sometimes I don't understand everything, and that's fine. I will say that the middle of this book, I really didn't believe in myself, like genuinely, I mean, it's like it even though I knew like all the things that I knew, I couldn't really fully apply while I was reading this book. It was like I can't convince myself that I will have any better of an understanding of this book, even though I've read so many other books and have been confused in the middle of it, and by the end had like gleaned something, at least. But like, again, like in this experience, in the process of doing it, it's impossible, I think, to fully apply those things, to take what you've learned from some other experience and prove to yourself that you can apply it to this situation. It's like while you're in the middle of it, it just feels impossible, but then you keep doing it, and again, it's like I don't necessarily feel like I really am that much further, but at the same time, it's like, I have to believe that something happened, and that I've learned stuff, and that the very fact that I tried to do something and sort of stuck with it to some extent, despite the confusion and the discomfort, and no guarantee that I would come out with anything, that is, I think, valuable in and of itself. So
I honestly don't. If I sit, I mean, I've done this a few times where I sit and think, so what do I know more about Hegel now than I did when we started this? And my general answer is not a damn thing. And I mean, I really feel like in some sense, I've learned absolutely nothing, because I'm just so confused by it all. But then what I'm hoping will happen, and this is similar, I think, similar to what Travis is saying, because I've had this happen before, where the experience of struggling through the material by myself and with others turns out then later stuff will come back to me, and I'll realize, oh, I actually did get something, So in other words, I'll read something about Hegel or something about Fichte or Kant or something, and then this, something will kind of bubble back up from my memory about reading this text and reading the seminar. I'm like, oh, I guess I did learn something. So I hope that happens, because I don't have a strong sense of having. I don't have a strong sense of understanding Hegel better, which is very disappointing for me and discouraging and demoralizing. But I'm just hoping it's not really faith. It's just based on past experience of reading difficult stuff, that I'm hoping I did in fact absorb and internalize stuff that will then, enrich my further exploration of Hegel and other thinkers in the future. I sure hope so.
Hey, and we read the entirety of the Phenomenology of Spirit and met every Friday for 3 months. Like, that's an accomplishment, guys. Like, I really appreciated this in the company. I mean, I think we should be damn proud of that. So, well done.
yeah, one of the things that, like, I don't know, I guess I like having read like The Idiot was like a pretty recent book that I read. I felt like I could glean nothing useful from that book. And like a month after, as I was reading, or after I had read it, I was seeing that book everywhere. But it was in this like sort of despair. Like I was just like, this is horrible. There is nothing I can do about this, and I am just seeing it everywhere. And I just, like I don't feel like I can use this in any meaningful way, or that there's anything like any lesson I can come out of it with, but I guess again, I don't really feel like that I have that lesson, but I feel like that book is a part of me in some way, and I think that like I can't measure the value of that, but I feel like it's important. I have to believe that it's valuable in some way, even though I feel like it's, there's not like any logical steps I can take from the things that happen in that book, or I can't make my life better in any way, or I don't really even feel like I necessarily understand the world better. I just see things and I'm like, oh my God, this is horrible. But I am inclined to think that's valuable, and I guess that's why I'm inclined to think that reading this book is valuable. So
Hunter can correct me, but that sounds to me similar to the notion of sublation, in the sense that
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
Yeah, you read this stuff and it sort of settles down into you and becomes a part of who you are. Like again, thinking of that notion of sedimentation, these things kind of sediment down into your mind and your being, and then they actually do end up influencing you in the future, even if you can't explicitly bring it forward and say, oh, that's where that came from, but it does change who you are.
I was sitting in Starbucks when I finished this because I needed a little bit, like, it's oddly enough, the chaos of Starbucks is less chaotic during my house during early release days of schools. So I was just sitting there and finished it. Speaking of sublation, and a little bit of an anecdotal funny note, it was like, well, I just sublated myself and I'm going to celebrate by go eating a cake pop. And that's what I told everyone in Discord. And now I have a very fun association with cake pops and self-sublation. So huzzah!
you just reminded me of early release days. Forgot about this.
Yeah, they love it. Not so much me.
Well then, my friends, my role is being called for again. To begin and end, that's my job. So yeah.
So what are we just going to take a break then till the spring, or do you guys, if we continue to meet, it would need to be, for me personally, I would much prefer if it was something that was really quick and easy to read, because
Well, let's do a platonic dialogue just to go from like the opposite scale, Let's find out what justice really is, guys.
That doesn't sound easy to me. That doesn't sound like
I'm game for science of logic next, but
Yeah, no, dude, if I have to read something interpretive like this again, I'm going to throw up. I'm going to throw up all over my keyboard and mouse. I mean, a part of me is like, it wants to slap myself awake and be like, get in there. The people need you. You gotta go. It's hard for a reason, and like, why should you do it? Because nobody else will, like Ryu from Pet Plague. But then another part is like, please, no more, please. I'm beaten. I'm raw. I'm battered. My flesh is bruised and spongy. My mind is weak. I need a break.
I'll genuinely say, like, if we could just, maybe, I don't know, read something easier, or like, I don't know, someone said essays, that sounds all right, but like, I don't know, I guess I could just leave, so that's fine. But if we just did like an hour-long seminar for the rest of the semester.
So I'm hearing Wittgenstein. That's what I'm hearing.
Oh God.
That would be really cool.
Something that popped into my mind, which you guys, I suspect, are all going to reject, but something that would be, I don't know how easy it would be, but quick and accessible would be just like articles from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy or something, just pick an article and read through it and talk about it. Because I mean, the difficulty, frankly, for me in terms of time is I have to, it requires pretty much a full day, sometimes a little bit over that to get through the reading for the phenomenology, and giving them my grading load, that's difficult. I mean, I was committed to the project, so I was willing to do that. But if it's something that, again, not the articles on Stanford Encyclopedia aren't necessarily easy, but there's stuff that I can kind of read through and skim through and kind of like, yeah, I kind of understand this. But that's a possibility if we don't want to just drop it all together.
No, I like that, because then we can all kind of just recommend, like, what are you interested in? And then we can spend a week just doing each one of us, like, and I'll go last because we spent 3 months on what I'm interested in. But like, we can each kind of be like, I've kind of wanted to learn about this guy. Let's talk about this, for a seminar. I think that's a good idea.
I also think so, just because I feel like I really don't have like a general sort of, encyclopedic understanding of philosophy, to just kind of get these smaller, like more general ideas that I can sort of, maybe create some sort of a structure in my brain. That'd be cool. I don't feel like I have that usually. So
So the question would be, if we do that, what, I don't know, maybe we want to chat about this offline or something, but if we want to pick, does anyone just want to, so Hunter has recused himself, at least for the first choice, but there's a whole lot of stuff that if you look at the requests that people have made for books to read, there's ideas there, Wittgenstein's there and Spinoza, and those are a couple of really popular ones.
I'm fine with doing Wittgenstein personally. Joseph mentioned him, and he said that he was sorry, Hunter's comment made me laugh.
Yeah, hold select, Hunter. Hold select. It's fine.
Yeah, I'd be fine with Wittgenstein. I'll leave it.
Yeah, it's up to you guys. I certainly would enjoy it, but it's up to you guys.
Joseph's the new guy too. Let's give him first pick.
God, no, please, because no, it's democratic here through the community of absolute knowing, where we must mutually understand my act and moral will is that of the community itself too. So, let's vote on it. I am not a Wittgenstein expert. I like him and read him, but I don't know anything about him. Let's just make that clear.
If you agree, vote. Say aye.
Oh God,
Aye.
no.
Aye.
Aye. And I just looked there. Very not surprisingly, there are several articles on Wittgenstein, but there is one that's just Ludwig Wittgenstein, which is a summary of his stuff throughout his life. So
yeah, there's some good texts I can recommend that are good summaries, and Ross has some really good essays on him that are also, he has some secondary sources and some good essays to kind of dive into that I can post in Discord.
Okay, all right, let's do it.
Yeah.
So what I'm thinking is, for me personally, is I just want something fairly quick and easy. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, guys.
Maybe
next spring for Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein spring. What a wonderful season.
Well, what I mean is we could say we're going to talk about the Stanford article on Wittgenstein, and then if other people have time to read other sources, that's great. But personally, I'm looking for something kind of quick and easy.
Yeah, no, I think that the main thing should just be that article, and then if you want to read more and have something to bring, yeah, sure. But yeah, I'm probably only going to read that article.
Yeah, I'm probably going to read the article and listen to like one podcast per person, so that I have like a fun fact that I know that nobody else has, so that I can be like superior. That's my goal.
Yeah, Joseph and I have a friend Eric, who's big into Wittgenstein, so I can probably pull some special facts out of him that nobody.
Yeah, it depends on whether or not we get him or his drag persona. I'd love to see his drag persona, so maybe we can get her on. It's amazing.
All right.
Go ahead, Travis. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say let's end.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
end.
End on that. Eric, you're doing drag and come into this Wittgenstein lecture. Anyway.
Destroy it, never.
Yeah.
And
At some
then-
point, and apparently it's not now because Travis wants us to go away. We need to start figuring out what we're going to do in the spring, and you know, if Pete, see, I don't know if Ed, maybe Ed's not on the. I created this Google Doc that where people can just list their 5 preferences for philosophy books. Maybe I'll send a link to that to you, but at some point we need to figure that out. But Travis wants to go, so we can go now.
And
Travis,
real
no,
quick,
with your hair like that, you look kind of like Jesus. But
oh wow! Before we go, if you guys are like in
Mm.
Travis too or Jackson, you know, if we need to take a break, I'd game for watching a movie because I'd love to watch a movie and hang out with Jackson and Travis and Ed, all you guys, and hear your
Yeah, if we
inputs.
wanted to just do that next week, but let's discuss it on Discord. Or
For now, let's end the 3 months.
All right.
I could just keep
Really?
that up until we end. I could force us.
bye,
I could just-
Hegel.
End it now, quickly.
Hegel is gone.
Yeah.
Bye,
Not
Hegel.
really.
Gets ablated.